Hello everybody and welcome to my channel. This video is about teaching children about God. I'm going to cover 6 basic topics you may want to teach them at a young age, when is a good time or age to begin with, and some suggestions for how to explain these somewhat complex topics in a way they'll understand. I made this video to help other parents or even church school teachers looking for some creative ways to teach children about God. Let's get our children saved. And I want to put a quick disclaimer in here as I don't want to traumatize anyone. What I'm sharing here is my own opinions. This content is for informational purposes only, and if you choose to use it, it's at your own risk. What worked for me and my family may not work for you and yours. As always, as parents and church school teachers, we have to use our own discretion and best judgment to decide what to teach our children and when. So the first big question on this topic is, when do you teach them about God? Many of us wonder if they are too young to understand or too young to know the Lord, or even are they going to be traumatized by it? I mean, it can be a pretty painful realization as an adult. Based on my research and personal opinion, I would say when they get to the age of reason, meaning when they know the difference between right and wrong, which can be very early on. And I'm going to read a quick excerpt from Romans 2, chapter 2, verses 13 through 15, that basically says that the law is written on our hearts and no one is exempt. For it is not those who hear the law who are righteous in God's sight, but it is those who obey the law who will be declared righteous. Indeed, when Gentiles who do not have the law do by nature things required by the law, they are a law for themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts, their consciences also bearing witness, and their thoughts sometimes accusing them, and at other times even defending them. So we know right from wrong by our conscience and our common sense. Most of us know when we're doing something wrong, even if we don't know the gospel, including children. So I interpret this to mean that we will all be judged according to the law, whether we've read the Bible or heard the gospel. And I'm sure there is a point at which, if a child were to pass at a young age, or if they are still children when Jesus returns, and none of us knows when that will happen, in these cases, I'm sure that God would grant them grace and mercy and make some sort of exception. But there's also a point at which they do come under the law, and we need to make sure that they're prepared for it. I've heard of children getting saved at 5 years old and even younger. But I've also heard people who have had prophetic visions of children around the ages of 10 through 12 who were not allowed into the kingdom of heaven. And how tragic for a child of this age to have not been taught properly and now be tormented for eternity. I would venture to say because they didn't fully understand. So I don't want to make assumptions about what God will do with my children. I want to be sure of their salvation. And it's up to us as parents to teach them about this. There are several biblical verses about teaching our children the way of God, like Proverbs 22:6 and Deuteronomy 6:5 through 9. Like, raise a child up in the way they should go, and they will never stray. You can look those up on your own. So as soon as a child is aware when they've done something wrong, that they are going to be in trouble with mom and dad, they show some type of conviction and remorse when they get caught at doing something wrong, I would say this is the right time to start teaching them about God. And I believe that we can do it in ways that help them understand without necessarily scaring them. And I'll share my tips for that as we go along. Of course, use your own discretion on what you think they'll understand and the best way to get started. And you may be wondering, why is it so important that we teach our children about God at such a young age? I'll share 2 quick life stories on this. First, the talk with my son. Now, I don't remember learning about anything about sexuality until I was in 5th grade, and we had this sex ed class. So I had always thought I would have this talk with my son when he was about 12 years old, when puberty was around the corner or just starting. However, I learned quickly by the time he was 10, which was in 2023, that his friends were already talking about different concepts that I had hoped he didn't know anything about. And with all kinds of internet videos more accessible than ever, it's impossible to shield them from everything. And he went to public school also. So I finally pulled him aside at 10, and he pretty much already knew everything I told him. He even knew what transgender and gay meant. So, unfortunately, unless you're really isolating and sheltering them, monitoring all of their content from the world, they're going to be learning a lot at a young age. My second story is about my daughter. When she was growing up, I was not a believer. I wouldn't say I was an atheist. I had an idea that there was some kind of higher power, but I didn't really know what it was. I knew that there were a lot of religions in the world, and I thought they all kind of worshiped the same God, so it didn't matter whether you called it Allah or Buddha or Muhammad or Jesus. And I never gave much thought to the afterlife. I had gone to church as a child a few times, and my father was the dominant religious parent in the family, and he was a terrible example. So I really didn't know what to think as I became an adult. I didn't know if I had been influenced into a religion that was right or wrong. So my decision with my daughter was that I wouldn't teach her about any religion until she was old enough to understand. And then she could study them and decide what she believed. That was also my plan. I wanted to spend some time studying all of the different religions before I made a decision about, my spiritual future. And so I let her watch pretty much whatever she wanted on TV. Um, there were only a couple shows that I blacklisted because they were either very disturbing or demoralizing, and it was obvious. And it really wasn't plugged into what was being taught at school either. Well, let me tell you, that was a huge mistake, and I didn't realize it until it was too late. Fast forward 23 years later, after the Great Awakening, conservative parents got a huge wake up call to what was happening in the news, what was being taught in schools, and what kind of content was being spoon fed to our children on TV and YouTube between, I would say, 2016 and 2020. And now she basically belongs to Satan. She's interested in the occult, yet highly averted to anything Christian, has a terrible self esteem, although this was a huge focus for me as a parent, building her up and making her feel good about herself as a child. None of this carried over for her. She has a victim entitlement mentality, extreme depression, and believes nearly everything she sees on Facebook or mainstream media without question. Life is a constant struggle for her, and she has no idea to how to get out of it or even what's causing it. Now, I hope that's not the end of her story. I am trying to reverse the damage with her, but I feel it's going to be a long road. So, the point of this story is this is what the world will teach your children if you don't teach them otherwise. How to love sin and the world, how to be depressed, entitled, victimized, how to behave in a completely demoralized way without remorse, how to run from authority and religion and into the occult, right into the hands of Satan. And I get that most families have two working parents, or you may be a single parent, and we have hardly any time to spend with our children as it is, especially when they're very young. This is how it was for me too. I had to work long hours trying to make a better life for us. I saw my daughter in the morning and at bedtime most days, but we've got to make time for this stuff. We can do it while we're in the car, while we're having dinner, while you're putting them to bed at night. We have to find a way to fit it in somehow. And by the way, focus on what's important while your kids are young. Time flies by so fast when you have every minute booked. Jobs will come and go. Everything else in this world will come and go, but your family is forever. Okay, so let's get into the actual lessons. I've come up with 6 basic Christian topics for children, and you can obviously mix and match whatever makes sense for you, depending on the age of your children and their knowledge so far. I would break these up into separate lessons and make sure the child understands each topic separately and then explain how they relate to each other as you move along. So, first and foremost, let's start with God. I think this is the best way to start because it's very easy for them to grasp. Of course, that's how the Bible is written as well. We learn about God before we learn about Jesus. Of course, Jesus will ultimately be the most important for them to learn about, but I have difficulty in explaining the story of Jesus without talking about death. And I know that is a sensitive topic, especially for very young children that may not even understand death yet. And if anyone has any ideas or suggestions for getting around that, I'd love to hear them in the comments. But for now, I would start with God and, get to Jesus as soon as you think they have an understanding about death and the afterlife. So, starting at the beginning with the story of all creation, Adam and Eve, and the fall of man, just so they have a basis of understanding of who God is and who we are. So that's Genesis chapters 1 through 3. I explained it this way. When God created Adam and Eve, they were created in his image, so they were like him. They were special, beautiful, loving creatures. They loved God and all of creation. They were just filled with the fruits of the Spirit, as described in Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 to 23. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and gentleness. I imagine they poured out their devotion to God daily and just loved life and enjoyed everything in it. However, one day when Eve was tempted by the serpent and ate of the fruit of the tree of life, she directly disobeyed God because he had told them not to. And that's what sin is, disobeying God. When that happened, people became cursed and inclined to sinning. And also, spirits were released into the world that could influence people to disobey God, like the serpent did. Now, I know there's some detail missing there, and the timeline isn't exactly right for the Nephilim or the spirits that were released, but I think that's okay as long as they get the current state of the world. The rest can be added in later as they get older. So, what does it mean to be inclined to sin? Here's an example I used with my son. Our flesh, or our bodies, crave things that are bad for us. For example, like unhealthy foods. Think of a time when you really wanted your favorite sugary cereal or pizza or donuts. You knew that wasn't a good choice for your health, and mom and dad would probably say no, but you wanted it anyway. You may have heard a small voice in your head say maybe a salad or some carrots would be a better choice. And then my son says, but then you eat the pizza anyway, right? And I'm like, exactly. So our bodies want to do things that are bad for us, and sometimes we let our bodies win, but other times our mind wins. And we can easily be influenced by other people or spirits to do bad things if we're not careful. That makes it even harder to make the right decision. I also think of those older cartoons where they would show a devil and an angel on someone's shoulder that are arguing about a decision. And that's the way it is in real life, only you don't see the spirits, you just hear them. And you have the extra confusion of trying to separate that from your own voice and thoughts. So if they see that in a show, I would use it as a good starting point to explain this concept. And other sins that might be relatable for younger kids are lying, cheating, stealing, hitting someone, getting angry, or saying mean things. So we have to be careful what we do and pay attention to who we're listening to and do our best to avoid those things. Now, after Adam and Eve had had many children and the world was fairly populated, he saw that people were struggling with sin, which not only angered him, but made it more difficult for him to see and hear us. Because he is all of those good things we talked about, he doesn't like it when we are doing bad things. You might have been mad at someone before and not wanted to talk to them or even see them. Even though you still loved them or wanted to be friends, you just couldn't get over your feelings at the time. So that's how it is with God and sin. In fact, he wanted to punish us terribly because his people were being very bad. Just like mom and dad punish you when you do bad things. But usually it is because we want you to learn how to be a good person, and of course to help you learn how to stay safe. Like when we say not to touch the hot stove or play in the road because we don't want you to get hurt. So God wanted to punish us for being very bad. And you can let them imagine what a terrible punishment might be. I'm sure they'll come up with some cute ideas. I don't know if we necessarily have to talk about death or hell as a punishment yet, again, depending on their age. So he wanted to make a way for people to be forgiven, even though we deserved the most terrible punishment. He wanted to save us from this punishment and forgive us so he could forgive us and be friends with us again. So he created a son of his own that would come to earth and be human like us. He was to live a perfect life without sin, to obey God for his entire life, but then to be punished severely. So that through this one man, the punishment would be fulfilled and the sins of all mankind could be forgiven, and then we could be on good terms with God again. So this lesson sets them up perfectly to understand why Jesus had to come when they are ready for that, and you can move right into that next. And if they have questions about who or what God is, I would say he is like the ultimate superhero. He can speak and breathe things into existence. He knows what we're thinking and doing all the time, and he's on our side. He wants to see us be safe, happy, and prosperous. He can send angels to help us. He lives in heaven up in the sky and watches over us. And heaven is like the new Garden of Eden. It's a perfect, wonderful place for us all to go live in one day with him and be perfectly happy, just like Adam and Eve were in the beginning. We can't see him all the time, but we can feel his presence, just like the wind. We know it's there, but we can't see it. And also, a quick side note for parents who tell their children about Santa Claus. Some argue that we shouldn't be doing that and we should teach them about God and Jesus instead. But if you do, if a child can believe that this person knows what they're doing all the time and knows if they are being bad or good, and that one man can magically leave presents for all the children of the world who are good on one night of the year, then they can understand and believe in God. Now, I'm not trying to compare the two here, but I'm just saying that there are some similar concepts here to the real world, to the real living God, that shouldn't be too far-fetched for them to comprehend. Okay, so the second lesson when they are ready is Jesus. What they'll need to understand is why Jesus came, why we should believe that he was the Son of God, and what his life, death, and resurrection means for us. I would recommend starting with any one of the disciples' testimony in the New Testament. Fun fact, Mark and John are the shortest. However, I decided to start with Luke, with my son, because I just thought it was very straightforward and concise. And we didn't read every single part. My focus was getting him the critical information first, with the expectation that eventually he will read the entire Bible. But for now, I just wanted him to get the basics. And there are children's versions out there that I'm sure are easier for them to understand, but if you don't have one of those, you can just use the Bible. Just substitute words that they would understand better if you have to. Skip over any scary, graphic, or explicit content, but make sure they get the general idea of what happened: life, death, and resurrection, and the significance of his coming. So I covered the miraculous births of both Jesus and John the Baptist, what water baptism meant, repentance from sins, the miracles that Jesus performed, how he enabled his disciples to also perform miracles in his name, because that becomes important later, how he told the people stories to help them understand how they should live so they could go to heaven, and about his crucifixion, that even though he performed many miracles, many of the people didn't believe he was the Son of God. So they had him crucified, which was how they dealt with criminals back then. And that was all part of God's plan, that Jesus had to live a perfect life and die so that mankind could be saved from sin and death and go to heaven. But people have to accept his gift. We can't be like the people who didn't believe him and killed him. We have to pray to him and tell him that we believe in him and that we want to accept his gift by being forgiven of our sins and being saved from our sins. And we want him to lead our lives so that we can be with him in heaven one day. So, the third topic we should be teaching them about are the 10 Commandments. So they have a clearer picture of what sin is and what we are not supposed to do or try to avoid. I won't go through them all. They are in Exodus 20 if you want to look them up. I'll cover just a few of them that I would modify slightly for the younger ones. And I didn't make these all up myself. I will post all of my sources in the comments. So I just did a little research on the 10 Commandments for kids, and these are some of the ideas that I've come up that I've either taken from that or come up with myself based on what my church has done, et cetera, et cetera. So commandment number 3, always treat God's name with respect. Don't misuse his name. I tell my son I don't want to hear the words God or Jesus unless he is talking to him or about him. Commandment number 4, keep the Sabbath holy. So Sundays are for praise and rest. I know a lot of us struggle with this one. Some of us even have to work a job on Sundays. In our family, we try to finish any weekly chores on Saturday. Sometimes I'll cook a big meal on Saturday so we can just have leftovers on Sunday. Or if I cook a special meal on Sunday, I'll try to make it one that's not too much work. And I really try to limit work and chores on Sundays only to what has to be done. You may be able to do this at your job as well, so that Sunday is an easier day. There's a difference between what you're doing on Sunday and what you do the rest of the week. And really just spend some time with God, which really should be every day, but especially on Sundays. And not just going to church, but taking extra time to read the Bible and pray and just rest in his presence for those of you who are born again. For those of you who aren't, simply pray, simply try to find some quiet time to meditate on something you read in the Bible that may be extra meaningful for you, or simply just find some quiet time and try to meditate and just connect with the Lord. Try not to do anything that's stressful or very physically demanding. I like to try to plan to have a picnic with the kids, go bike riding, watch a Christian movie, or really just enjoy the family. Play a board game, something like that. Nothing reminds you of your blessings more than enjoying your family and friends. And you will find yourself looking forward to Sundays if you're able to do this and using them as God intended to rest and recharge. Commandment 6, thou shalt not kill. I think this can be said less harshly by simply do not hurt others with words or actions. Commandment 7 is about adultery. In other words, keep your promises to everyone, including your wife or your husband and God. Commandment 9 is about false testimony. In other words, always tell the truth and don't lie. And Commandment 10, do not be jealous or envious of what other people have. And I would also cover what I think of as the secondary commandments, like paying back debts, righting wrongs, especially if you steal or accidentally break or lose something that belongs to someone else. Always be kind to others. Treat others as you want to be treated, and forgiveness. Forgiveness is very, very important. There are many examples in the New Testament of how Christians should be living according to God's will. Be happy to hear your favorite ones in the comments, but of course, whatever you can apply to a child's life, make sure that they understand. So the fourth concept would be prayer. Kids are great at memorizing things, so prayers are usually easy for them to pick up. I was taught the Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep prayer when I was a child, and I've never forgotten it. But I decided to teach my son the Lord's Prayer because that's how Jesus told us to pray in the Bible. And I really like the fact that it says, "Lead me not into temptation and deliver me from evil," because I think that is something that kids particularly need. But you could really use any prayer or even some of the Psalms that speak to you or your kids. You can even study a few together and let them pick their favorite ones. So we say the Lord's Prayer first, and I added a few key segments afterward, like giving thanks and special prayer requests or special requests for forgiveness. And I put a little cheat sheet together for him that hangs on the wall next to his bed so he can follow it on his own. And it serves as a little reminder before he goes to bed, too. I have it up here if you want to take a look. So we give thanks for maybe having a fun day with friends or whatever highlighted the day for us. Then we pray for friends and family if they have special needs. And you want to just kind of keep it relevant to what's going on in this child's world, if they're having trouble with friends, um, if they think that their friend might need a special prayer, and things like that. And then we ask for forgiveness if there's any particular thing that they might have done wrong that day that they don't feel right about. And I always tell him he doesn't have to say it in front of me, so he doesn't have to be afraid of punishment, so he can say this part after I leave the room. But I just want him to know the importance of telling it to God. And I walked him through this process a few times, and we still pray together at night before bed sometimes. But I think you can do it anytime it's convenient. And we don't do it together every night. Sometimes we go to bed at different times, and I'll just remind him to brush his teeth and say his prayers before bed. In these cases, the cheat sheet above his bed is there so he can follow it on his own until he gets it memorized. And teaching them prayer at this point in life really isn't because I think they actually need forgiveness or that most children need to ask for forgiveness. When they reach a certain age, they will. But really, the point is just to get them used to praying and to understand what it's for and how to do it. And when I think about kids praying, I remember that situation in Cokeville, Wyoming, where there was a hostage situation at an elementary school, and the kids all prayed, and a bomb actually went off in the classroom where everyone was being held. But miraculously, none of the teachers or students were harmed. The only two people that died were the two bombers. And it's just such a touching story that really shows the significance of prayer. And there's actually a movie about it on Amazon Prime, called The Cokeville Miracle. And it's an awesome movie. But my takeaway from it was, thank God those children knew how to pray, because I think largely that was what saved them. So, the next area that I think is important for teaching children about God would be some formal schooling or church school. So, it's important to get them into a Sunday school or some type of formal schooling. If they're already going to a Christian school, for example, they probably are learning something. But for those who are going to public school, for example, you'll want to try to find them a good church school. You have to be careful, obviously, to find the right church and make sure it's the one that agrees with your values and is Bible based. And when I choose a church, I actually sit in on the children's church many times unexpectedly. I'll just go for the Sunday service and bring my kids, and we'll just stay there together. And we'll go to one or two sessions until we decide if it's right for us. The same goes for the regular service. We've been in a couple of situations where we've had to find a new church, and we just go to different ones until we find the right one for us, the one where we feel like we belong. But this is really just, it helps to broaden their knowledge as well as giving them a secondary source for the information. As parents, we know we can tell our kids something until we're blue in the face, but until they hear it from another peer or another adult, that's when the light bulb goes on and they're like, oh, yeah, what mom said must be true. And it's for the same reason that I think reading straight from the Bible is a good idea. Not only does it get them the vital information they need to learn, but it shows them that what you're saying is coming from an established and well known source. So it just adds some credibility for you. And it's fun for them too. They usually have snacks and put together special projects that they can show you and be proud of. So if you find a good one, they'll be looking forward to it too. And then you can talk to them afterwards about what they learn in class, and it's just another way for you to help that you can connect with them. In addition to some formal schooling, I would recommend just looking for other resources like workbooks, Christian movies, Christian books, and shows that they can watch so they can see that this information isn't just coming from you. And I do have a couple of really good resources for that I'll post in the comments. As we know, it's very possible for children to be possessed or oppressed by evil spirits at a young age as well. There were several children mentioned in the Bible that were actually possessed, and this would obviously make it very difficult for them to have a relationship with Jesus. In fact, most young children can even see spirits. And our typical response is that ghosts aren't real, monsters don't exist. We think we can help them to not be afraid by doing this, but kind of telling them that they didn't see what they saw or that they should just ignore it or, they must be crazy or something. So they learn to suppress this ability as they grow older, or even worse, not tell you about it again if they do see something. And then they don't know what to do or what to think about it because we told them that they couldn't have seen something because that thing doesn't exist. I can't help but wonder if more people would have spiritual abilities as an adult if they were actually taught what spirits are at a young age and how to deal with them. I wish I could go back in time when my children were young, and instead of refuting what they were telling me, I actually listened to them and taught them how to deal with the spirits. I wonder how much better off they would be today if we taught them that if they see an evil spirit, they should rebuke it, and when they are scared, they should pray to Jesus. Now, there may be a more delicate way to go about this, but it's certainly food for thought. And by the way, this seems to be an America problem only, where we try to hide spirituality in the spirit world from our children and from the general public, when in most other countries it's common knowledge and it's an everyday part of life. And I honestly don't understand how Christians can refute the existence of demons and evil spirits, and why this is such a taboo topic when the basis of our religion is a God who is, in fact, spirit, who lives in a spirit world, i.e., heaven, a devil or a Satan who is also a spirit, and angels and demons of all kinds are spoken about in the Bible. And let's face it, if they're not seeing it in the actual physical world, they're likely seeing it on TV and the internet. The mainstream media is designed to glorify sin and the occult and vilify Christians and Christ. Our kids are extremely vulnerable in this arena, especially if they aren't taught at an early age what's really going on in this world. This puts them at a huge disadvantage. And I believe that goes beyond God and religion. If you think about your own family values and traditions, political issues, dealing with strangers, even activities you don't want them to engage in, we need to be teaching our children what we want them to learn. And let me tell you something that may be a hard truth for some of you. If you aren't teaching and raising your children, someone else is. If you aren't teaching them your values, then they are learning someone else's. And you don't want the world raising your kids. So there are many reasons why it's so important to educate, equip, and prepare them. And as with any teaching arrangement, try to make it a positive, safe environment so they feel free to comment or ask questions. Make it an open discussion where you can, and even ask for their feedback. I usually ask if things make sense or if they understand what we just read or what they think it means. And try to avoid criticism or judgment unless you absolutely have to correct something. There are many ways to interpret things, and you may even find that their feedback is an enlightening to you. This will get their this will get them much more engaged and they may even look forward to their study sessions with you. So, those are my 6 Christian concepts for children and some ideas on how you can explain them in a way that children will understand. I think these basic concepts are essential in preparing them to navigate the world as a child of God and to live a Christian life. So, I hope you found this helpful. I'd love to hear your thoughts too. If you agree, disagree, or want to share other ideas and suggestions, please do so in the comments.